Blog Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to episode number 109 of Songs of Selah here on 17 Pneuma Radio. Thank you for tuning in this evening. I'm your host, Scott Thomas Outler, and it is Tuesday, June the 9th, 2020. Woe be in the age of Wuhan, or a renaissance of the Roaring Twenties. Only time will tell at this point. But it's a choose-your-own-adventure story for sure. Just don't blink, or else you'll miss the next peak. It's gonna be a banger. I want so badly to simply state the facts and tell the truth, but I would never dare do so without lacing a subtle note of ambiguity into the fabric to avoid potentially robbing a reader of their own interpretation. Thus speaks a poet's last alibi. Coming up on tonight's episode, I'll be joined by guest Lecco Morris. Lecco is a poet, pianist, and composer residing in New Orleans, and he is also the vice president of Ragtime Poetry. So I'm looking forward to learning more about the work they do at Ragtime, as well as hearing him read a selection of his work here tonight. That interview will be coming up in just a bit, so please do stay tuned. And to kick the proceedings off this evening, I'm going to hand things over to our friend Mihaela Melnick as she presents her latest installment of Mickey's Poetry Cafe from Caput Mundi. Enjoy.
Hello, Thomas, and hello to you, all beautiful people around the world. There's no better place to be right now than in this cafe where I assure you that love is the only thing that matters. And to prove you that I'm right, I'll read you a marvelous poem of love, written by an English guy that went by the name Kit. Yes, Kit, maybe you already guessed him. He lived around the 15th century. Oh well, he was Christopher Marlowe. And he used his bucolic ways to win over his beloved, adorable ways back in those days, and even now, to be honest, because every word in this poem conveys commitment, hope, and love. So now, take a seat, make yourself comfortable, and listen to the passionate shepherd to his love. Come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove that hills and valleys, dales and fields, woods or steepy mountain yields. And we will sit upon the rocks, seeing the shepherds feed their flocks by shallow rivers to whose falls melodious birds sing madrigals. And I will make thee beds of roses, thousand fragrant posies, a cap of flowers and a kirtle, embroidered all with leaves of myrtle, a gown made at the finest wool, which from our pretty lambs we pull, pearl-lined slippers for the cold, with buckles of the purest gold, a belt of straw and ivy buds, with coral clasps and amber studs. And if these pleasures may thee move, come live with me and be my love. The shepherd's swains shall dance and sing for thy delight each May morning. If these delights thy mind may move, then live with me and be my love. Well, that was it, and thank you for stopping by. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Welcome back to Songs of Selah. Once again, that was Mihaela Melnick with this week's edition of Mickey's Poetry Cafe. Thank you for the wonderful poem, Mickey, and as always, we're looking forward to next week's segment. Even with all the madness that has been taking place recently in the United States, with the pandemic, the lockdowns, the murder of George Floyd, the peaceful protest around the nation, the riots, the looting, the conversations about race relations and much-needed reforms in the police departments, the political slugfest that is never ending during an election year, and whatever else you'd like to add to the list. There was one event that also took place that really puts into focus what America can represent when operating at its best with an entrepreneurial spirit and a forward-looking agenda. That event was the launch of the Dragon shuttle to the International Space Station. Congratulations to Elon Musk, SpaceX, NASA, the 2 astronauts on board, and everyone else involved in the successful mission. It was a beautiful sight to behold and offered a much-needed sigh of relief during these troubled times, albeit temporarily. Now onward to the moon, Mars, and whatever else lies ahead in the cosmos as the destiny of mankind presses further toward the stars with an indomitable creative urge. I do encourage listeners to please take a moment and subscribe to the 17 Numa Radio channel. It's easy to do and it's free. All you have to do is click the follow button found on the page where this episode is streaming, and that'll get you signed up. And a reminder to everyone that all past episodes of Songs of Selah can be accessed or downloaded for later listening from the archive here on the channel or from the Songs of Selah page at 17numa.com. Thank you to everyone who spreads the word about this program and shares episode links. Your support is always greatly appreciated. If you'd like to call in with questions for tonight's guest and or to read some work of your own, you're certainly welcome to do so. Phone lines will be open through the night at 646-668-8757. And I do believe that'll just about wrap things up here at the top of the show. Let's go to a music break now and then come back on the other side with tonight's guest, Lecco Morris. Stay tuned.
I'm afraid of men with clogs for eyes, with suits for skin. I'm afraid we swallowed all our medicine. I'm afraid of God and all his angry clown. I'm afraid the world will die without a sound. I was just trying to say something beautiful, something meaningful. You can't live in the world just breathing beautiful. No, you can't live in people talk so loud, people talk so loud, people talk so loud. They'll talk until no words come out. Yeah, they'll talk until their brains fall out.
back to Songs of Selah here on 17 Numa Radio. If there's anyone interested in appearing as a guest on a future episode of the program, please feel free to contact me via email at 17numa@gmail.com or connect and reach out on any of the social media platforms, and I'd be more than happy to set you up for an episode coming up later this year. And tonight's guest, Lecco Morris, is a New Orleans-based typewriter, street poet, pianist, and composer. He is also vice president of Ragtime Poetry, a boutique event company bridging live custom poetry to weddings and special events around the country. His poem, Cosmos Disambiguation, has been published in the new zine Planetary Problems. He helped co-found the typewriter, poetry, and fine art magazine Harlequin Creature. Yet primarily thousands of his poems exist, framed on bedstands, stuffed into drawers, both revered and totally forgotten around the world, birds let loose from his 1936 Royal typewriter. Lecco, thank you so much for joining the program. How are you doing tonight?
Excellent, Scott. Thank you for a beautiful introduction, and appreciate listening to the program and everything you've contributed so far. Really excited to talk with you tonight.
Fantastic. Yeah, my pleasure. It's good to have you here. I'm sure we can get into a lot of different stuff. And maybe to kick things off, you want to talk a little bit about where your interest in poetry and the arts initially began?
Sure. So the arts run really deep in my family. My mother used to work for the National Endowment of the Arts, and my father is the director of a theater and community organization, and kind of always has been my entire life. So the arts, unlike a lot of people where they, were a reaction or a choice, they were just my whole world, always. So I'm in that way, I sort of had an easy entry because that was my universe. I've played piano and been a musician forever, and that's my training is in music theory and composition. And I didn't really get into poetry seriously in a way that I carried with me wherever I went until I studied abroad in Prague and had a really remarkable course taught by a professor at Charles University, and it was called Post-War East European Poetry, The Still Unborn About the Dead. And it was literally taught in the turret of a castle with 3 other students, a 4-hour class with a man named Michael March, a poet himself, who knew most of these poets or the children of the very poets that he taught. And it was such an intimate introduction to really the power of poetry to resist, to speak underneath a repressive society and still sing artistically. Just there's this whole frame of mind that and then I discovered this one poet, Zbigniew Herbert, who changed my life. I read everything he's ever written 10 times over. So after that point, I started writing all of the time, and then started to sort of realize, I'm a poet too. So I guess that's kind of how it happened for me.
Sounds like a fantastic course. Can you give the name of that class one more time?
Yeah. I'll never forget it. I'll be 90 years old if I live that long, and I'll still remember it. Post-war East European Poetry, The Still Unborn About the Dead.
Very nice. Yeah, it's a poem in and of itself, pretty much.
Yeah. Michael March, that professor, is a poem in himself.
Right on. One of your mentors, it sounds like. So can you talk a little bit about that experience being over in Prague? What else did you partake of while you were there?
So it was my sophomore year. I was a music theory and composition student, and my school allied with Charles University which is one of the oldest universities in Europe. And what's really compelling about Prague is the city that somehow mostly by keeping its head down, managed to be unbombed and undesecrated throughout history. So it's like entering an older Europe than even the rest of Europe was my sensation about it. But I studied music theory and composition there, and was doing a mixture of jazz and classical. And I think what the mark really left on me by Prague and by that experience is a society that treats art very differently and thinks about art very differently. And my composition professor, while I was there as a sort of avant-garde musician and composer, but it was built more into his life. It wasn't like his job. It was a different integration of the idea of the arts, which is true for most of Europe. I mean, they're federally funded. There isn't this fight that exists in America to say, no, art is important. People just understand art's important. You fund it. You celebrate artists. And I guess being abroad for 4 months, and not just, a couple weeks on a vacation, but really living abroad. And I subsequently returned to Europe for a year and hitchhiked Europe for a year and actually wrote about 150 poems during that period of time in 11 countries. So Europe really stuck with me and still has. But it was that sensation of, this is a place that values this, whether it's music or poetry.
So after you go on those adventures across the pond and then make your return to America, what was the transition getting back into the groove here like?
That's a good question. I have a very specific story in response to that. So I just shy of a year in Europe, hitchhiked the continent 2.5 times over, and worked on farms through a program called WWOOF, WWOOF, Worldwide Opportunities for Organic Farmers, and was living in this world where I grew what I ate, and I lived in small communities, and everything was, there was nothing touristic about my experience. I was living in Europe in different places, and I never went into a grocery store once. That wasn't the need. And when I got back right before Christmas, I went on a grocery shop with my mother to BJ's, and I had a panic attack. One of the only panic attacks I've ever had in my life in a BJ's, because it was so oppressively enormous and seemed so disembodied from everything, just, 40 feet high of just endless choice in too large a package. And I had to run outside of BJ's and wait for my mother. So it took about a week of like, oh yeah, America is really different. So there really was an adjustment curve.
Reacclimation to the culture shock. Yeah, ripped out of the fields and thrust back into the materialism. To the nth degree.
Yeah, which I left for Europe with a 42-pound backpack and came back with gifts with a 24-pound backpack. So I definitely learned how little you actually need, and then come back to this country of like need. So that was wild.
Grasp. So those lessons that you learned through the organic farming, and I'm assuming the sustainability lifestyle, have you carried that forward in any way, being back here?
Well, it made an immediate mark because I actually for a while worked as the executive director. I say that, it sounds like a big title. I was really trying to cohere a group of chefs called the Chefs Consortium, which is this group in the greater New York State area of really high-end chefs that care about educating communities about local farms. And so for a little over a year, I sort of tried to cohere that group into a 501c3 and all this. So I directly tried to apply it. I think that was 5-6 years ago. I think that just the ethos of place of all of these wonderful countries, and and the knowledge that there are infinite ways to live, and to question whenever it's implied that there's a single way to be, to just always question that. I guess that's like what has been my real long-term lived takeaway.
Very nice. That open-mindedness, realizing that there are many perceptions and prisms that this life is filtered through. It's a great lesson to learn at a young age, as you did. So you grew up in New York,
it sticks with you.
and then transitioned down to New Orleans, I take it, somewhat recently. What prompted that move?
Let's see, it was about 18 months ago or so. A lot of different things in my life. It was time to move on from what I was doing and who I was seeing and where I was, and I kind of felt this nagging sense that if I don't leap into completely being an artist, like let me only eat what I make, let me do this completely, that if I didn't do this now, I wouldn't ever really do it. So when I first got to New Orleans, I had no intention of being a professional typewriter busking street poet who then forms a company in New Orleans. I was going down there for piano. So my first job, I got my 18 hours after my arrival with really no plan. I just threw everything in my 2005 VW Beetle and drove 22 hours straight south. But I got a job as 5 days a week as a solo pianist at a hotel right on Frenchman Street. And so for a chunk of time, I was like, wow, I sort of have arrived here. It's phenomenally difficult in New Orleans to make a living as a musician without busting your butt so hard that's all you do, which I learned pretty quickly. And I kept on seeing these typewriter street poets, and I'm super intrigued by it. I've also owned a typewriter for a lot. I'm not one of those people that's like a purist about always writing a poem on a typewriter, but I had a typewriter since I was a kid, and used it usually if I wanted to like write a really important letter or something like that. But I had brought my typewriter down to New Orleans, and at a poetry open mic, I met a guy named Daniel Lev Shkolnick, who has become one of my closest friends and my business partner in Ragtime Poetry Company. And he said, "Why don't you try this busking thing?" And he invited me to set up next to him on the street, and this was right on Frenchman Street. Which is where I started doing this primarily. And it was like, I can't describe the level of thrill of creating from nothing for someone who has no idea what they're about to experience, usually blowing their mind, and then being immediately paid for it. And then just doing that as long as you want. I mean, making your own hour. I mean, the first night I did it, I couldn't stop doing it. I think I stopped shop at 3 a.m. And so that became my primary source of income and my primary creative outlet after that. And a month or two after that, I'm terrible at times. I'm not quite sure the timeline, but Daniel told me, he showed me his website, Ragtime Poetry Company, which he had started, I think, 6 or 8 months prior. And he invited me to be his vice president and really grow the business. And so we've now done weddings and corporate events and flown to gallery openings in Texas and done pop-up events in New York. And it's really been really thrilling. It's meaningful work for the creator of it, and it's meaningful work for the person who receives it. So it's really this kind of beautiful thing that I, hope to only grow over the years.
I want to get into some of those events that you've been a part of, but first, can you take us through the process of what it is like when you're just one-on-one, face-to-face with that person that's coming up to you? How does that process go? Are you working off of a prompt from them? Are you coming up with the idea? And what that energy is when you're, typing something up right there on the spot?
Sure. Well, you have to mentally arrive in New Orleans, which is a crazy place. So really, in terms of what energy is coming at you, it could be anything. It could be anything from brokenhearted to extremely drunk and aggressive to hypersexualized to really curious to very intellectual to I'm going to stump this guy by giving him 4 random words from the Oxford English Dictionary. I mean, it really is anything. But what happens is people generally come up and they don't know what you're doing. They're like, you writing the next great American novel? Or like, is that an old computer? Like they have some sort of line like this. And you just explain to them, like, no, I'm writing you a poem. You give me a prompt, anything. It could be a word, phrase, idea. And I write you an original poem on the spot, read it to you, and you pay me whatever you think it's worth. Just quite simple. And usually if someone has gotten to that point, they want a poem. And it could be, I've written poems that were so sexualized and ridiculous because that's what the person was asking for. And, I try to have fun with it and make sure that I'm never saying anything that I don't believe. And, they push you one way. It's this kind of like tete-a-tete sort of thing. And I've written a poem for someone's father who died the day before. I wrote a poem for a woman who aborted her daughter, aborted a child a week prior. Please write his birthday poem that he never had. So, I mean, it runs the gamut emotionally on the street. And, of course, events are very different because you'll go to a wedding and, you're going to be writing a lot of poems about commitment and love and, you got to really pull something because the more specific someone makes their prompt, the more that they give you something to really latch on, the more you can write a good poem. It's very hard to write a poem when you're in New Orleans and a tourist has given you the prompt New Orleans. It's not very inspiring for the creative juices. But everyone is interesting. I believe this. So if you needle them a little bit, you can arrive at something. Oh, they're in New Orleans because they're an architecture student researching the hybridization of architecture from this melting pot community. Okay, now that's the New Orleans I can write about. You know what I mean? So, like, it's a little bit therapy, it's a little bit court jester, it's a little bit truly literary, and it's a little bit, think on your feet, be improvisatory, be quick. I feel like I have an extra training in this because I'm a jazz pianist and composer, so I'm kind of used to the idea of building something from a small element and being improvisatory with it. So the process is wild, varied, but it has those elements in it.
What a unique experience that sounds like that you go through each time you put your fingers on the keys there. For some poets, they can sit down and write something every day, and that's a part of their lifestyle. And for others, they go through periods perhaps where they're feeling a little bit dry or the motivation isn't quite there. Is that something you have to deal with? You're just sort of testing your mettle every time you're there, whether you're inspired or not. You have to dig deep, I would think, at certain points to really pull the diamonds out.
I have to say that I think I have no fear of the blank page at this point, which I learned by doing this. I didn't know that before. And the same with me at a piano. Like, my issue, if I'm going to talk about it, it is an issue, but my artistic complexity for me is from a very open tap of all the stuff that you produce, what are you going to hone and make really beautiful and spectacular? Because every one of these poems is a first draft of a poem, right? You know, and that's not. Sometimes that's a very good first draft. Sometimes there's only a tiny little bit of a really good idea in it, but it satisfies your poem commissioner. So yeah, I'm learning better now how to write and then seriously edit, and that is that's less of a skill set that I've honed. I've honed it a little bit more in music because you have to produce a finalized composition. But I could actually I've picked a couple of different poems for you that might sort of explain some of the things that I'm talking about if you're willing to transition over to some actual poetry.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. Let's do that. The stage is yours.
All right. Awesome. So let's see. I'm going to start with a street poem that's unedited, and I'll tell you a little bit of that story. And then I'm going to read something that I wrote recently that I really worked on to craft, and I think I've finally made a poem that has arrived where I want it to be. And then I have one more that speaks about my family and my experience in Europe and my grandfather's immigration from Greece. So this first poem, I actually like the first draft that was produced on the street, and the exchange was really special. So I was alone on Frenchman Street, and a woman with unbelievable gravitas and grace. She must have been 60 or so, and she just, Frenchman Street, it was, I think, a Friday or Saturday night, and everyone's drunk and crazy, and she was clearly not. She was walking with poise down the street, and I remember thinking, who is this woman? I really want her to ask for a poem. And she saw me at the corner of her eye. Hour later, she walks past the other direction. I'm just thinking, she has got something really special about her. She's amazing. She walks up to me about another half an hour from that. She stands right next to me, makes significant eye contact, and says, yes. Just the word. And I say, give me a word, I'll write you a poem. She immediately understands the proposition, no follow-up, thinks for a moment, and says the word shudders. And so I'll read you the poem that was produced out of that. Shudders. No one ever specified if they were intended to keep things out or in. Is it some thinly veiled concept of privacy, some Victorian discretion, or is it mortal terror at the dark, inky hands and fingers groping the edges of edges? Dust forms on them like a timestamp. They survive their owners and the next, never letting on what they kept in, what they kept out. And so I wrote her. Thank you. I read the poem to her. She closed her eyes for the whole experience. She immediately said, "Can you please read it again?" I read it again to her. She took it. She read it. And then she told me that she is the head of the poetry department at Oxford in England and would teach my poem to open her next class. And then she paid me and walked away, leaving me with my mouth open. And great, it's like me and my partner Daniel have 500 remarkable stories together, and that's just one of them. And I just liked the work that was produced from it. So if this works for you, I'd like to read you something a little different, not ragtime poetry, but a poem just for me, which is a little, it's actually a little harder for me in some ways to, it's, there's this interpretive element of who is this person in front of me, what are they looking for, how can I reach them? But when you're doing that work with yourself, sometimes that's harder. Just like editing your own poetry is harder than editing someone else's. But this poem I wrote at the very beginning of the age of COVID. I kind of gave up the ghost there. The poem is called The Age. And I awoke from a dream with much of this written in my head, wrote it, and then edited it furiously over the course of a month. So this is The Age. Even old, broken love sustains me now, the ash of our new Pompeii, shapes of us left for future archaeologists to unearth our final act. Grab hold of anything, a lover's best, but a desk will do, an apple, a chess piece, or bowl. Squeeze hard enough to forge a diamond. The rules don't work anymore. Our moats harbor frightened alligators that sing plaintive songs of the Delta. Even the gods are sanitizing themselves and counting their coins without mirth. This is my time. This is my time. The sun rises on the age of animals, the age of simplicity, the age of return, our dance with dirt. Have you noticed it is far more beautiful outside than we deserve? Have you kissed your God yet? Called her a name that was higher than guilt? This is the time. This is the time. If we don't start chanting now, the stars will never hear. We will have no claim to eternity, but speak only of dead light.
Hell yes, what a piece. Even the gods are sanitizing themselves and counting their coins with mirth. That's a hell of a line.
Thank you. I actually worked a lot on that line. It started in a less good place. Editing is important.
The downloading from a dream, is that something that happens to you often, or was this a rare case? How does that work with you?
Musically, yes. I have written piano sonatas, every single note remembered from a dream.
Wow.
Every single note. Poetically, not at all. I have never awoken with specific lines in my head, ever. But I have to say, and whenever I have shared this with other people, it's gotten a lot of resonance. This is a crazy time for dream life. This is a very crazy time for dream life. I feel like I live lifetimes every night. And I never really was like that before. I mean, whole separate dreams that are contained unto themselves, every single night. And whenever I've shared that with people, I've heard all these stories about how folks' dream lives have completely changed, and I think there's something happening globally in a big way that we are not sophisticated enough creatures to process in conscious life, and who knows what is that work of dreams, right? But it's working. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept, because we're coming into this period of great challenge, and if no one has the answer consciously, perhaps collectively, things are boiling up from underneath, and these ideas are sort of spitting out to different heads around the globe to come up with some answers.
Yeah, and it's not even. There are the clear and present dangers, right? Whether they're deeply embedded, you spoke before in the introduction, whether it's deeply embedded systemic racism, or whether it's this pandemic, or whether it's how all of our systems are found to be incredibly thin at this moment. And I mean, there are so many, it's a laundry list. But there's something else too that I think you can't know as it's happening, which is, I'll speak only for America as an American, but there is not much soulcraft in the relationship of Americans to work. It is, you work yourself to the bone to be able to maybe, at 65, after your body's a little broken, retire. There's a desperate sadness to American relationship to work, and with what now 30% or more of America unemployed, and given time to consider their lives, I think there will be, and I don't mean to sound wishy-washy or spiritual, but I just think that there will be intense psychic changes in this evaluative period where one's meaning in many ways is called into question. And I think that's so much the work of dreams, which I think I could never be convinced of a single interpretation, but I think they have endless interpretations. It's about how does your conscious self react to that which you processed in your dreams. And I think that's part of what this explosion is a recasting of who we are and what we're trying to do together.
Absolutely well said. And I think there is no doubt that people are taking a new approach to what works and what doesn't in their life, and hopefully out of this crisis that we've been through, perhaps families are coming together more than they were. People have had time to really delve into what are their hobbies and their crafts and their artistic inclinations, and actually have a moment to dive into those facets of their life and seek through them in a way that they haven't before, because of that sort of mechanistic work process that you were speaking about, that it's almost a stoicism in this country of just go grind yourself to the bone. And now hopefully that other aspect can flourish more, and we can be more artistically and spiritually inclined. And it's not looking so good so far with the return to the streets. Well, maybe in a way it is, though. I guess that's another thing you can look at two ways, because it's actually a beautiful thing in one way, even though it came out of a tragedy, the way people are coming together.
Absolutely. I mean, we lived in this world where people would brag about how little sleep they got because they're working so hard, and now we all realize, wait, health is what's important. Myself and my family are healthy, or myself and my family are not healthy, and these are the most important things. There's this kind of like, whoa, back to basics that the world is getting slapped with hard right now. I think There's also this very interesting thing where at the very beginning of this pandemic, you heard so many people say, like, can't wait to see all of the art that's going to be created out of this. And I think that's true, but that's a complicated statement because, if you're an artist, that art is your work, and, people need to focus on their health right now as well, which is not necessarily the same thing as producing and putting out there. I'm more interested in the big shifts that happen in culture and society after this. And we may be at the very beginning in America of seeing the first substantive big shifts in policing and in that we've seen in ever. And that is exciting. There is some beauty to recognizing that is a public health, that is an even more deeply embedded public health issue in America than the last 5 months. So yeah, I think there is untold growth even amongst unfathomable pain, definitely.
And going into this individual sort of soul search that everyone has had to go on is going to bring that understanding back to the awareness that these systems aren't what society is built on. It's built on individuals, it's built on family, it's built on community, these overarching decayed institutions that in many cases are no longer serving us. Sort of the guise is over, the thin veil has been removed, hopefully, in that regard, and now we just have to figure out how do you dismantle them in an appropriate way so that there isn't some sort of unnecessary chaos through the process. And that might be something that comes about naturally, just because of the change of consciousness. It's just going to organically grow out from that. And demilitarizing the police would be a damn good place to start.
Yeah, it would. And I think you're right about unnecessary chaos. Although I do think there is a line, a little chaos in reaction to many different things that have been revealed as the curtain pulls up. There is a balance of the right amount of outrage and the right amount of, and we're going to see it. We're going to live it. It's a wild time to be alive, and also myself and my family are healthy, and the gratefulness that blooms from that is almost like newfound. I didn't know I could be that grateful that my family is safe and I'm healthy. It's just kind of amazing. I'd like to transition, if it's all right with you, to a bit of a longer poem. Just as we're talking and thinking about family, my paternal grandfather, my papu, came to America when he was about 18 years old from Greece and lived through the Greek Civil War that kind of bubbled up after World War II, with communist and anti-communist forces still encamped throughout Greece. And he came to America. He hosted something like 50 or 60 families throughout Europe to come from Greece. He's this beautiful figure in my life. And when I was spending a year in Europe, he reached out to me via email. He didn't type, so he got my grandma, my yaya, to use the computer. But she wrote to me this kind of chiding email. What are you doing in Europe without going to Greece and rediscovering your family roots? Shame on you. And I got really annoyed. I was in London at the time visiting a friend. I got really annoyed, and I wrote back, Papu, want to show me your world in Greece? Come to Greece and show me. I don't speak Greek fluently, and I don't know where to look. So don't armchair lecture me. He then wrote back, see you in Thessaloniki in 5 days. I had no money. I was down to, pennies, which is fine. I could live on pennies, but I looked at the flight, didn't have money for a flight. So I hitchhiked from London to Western Greece. I'm talking 42 different vehicles picked me up, and I was a stowaway on 2 ferries, one from Dover, England to Calais, France, and one from Ancona, Italy to Igoumenitsa, Greece. And it took about 5 days, but I beat him to Thessaloniki by about 2 hours. And we then spent 2 weeks together with him showing me his world in Greece. And it was just me and him. My father rented him a car. And it was as beautiful and complicated and difficult and important and cross-generational and meaningful a time as you could possibly imagine. At one point, I had to take the keys from him because he was driving very poorly, and we got into a fight. And at the end of this fight, he said, come, we're going to a hotel, and he brings me to the finest hotel in Kavala Bay. And I say to him, he's on a fixed income, I had no money. I said, Papa, why are you doing this? And he said, quiet. Walks up to the desk and says, give us the finest room at the top with a view of Kavala Bay. And I go, Papa, what are you doing? And we go up there. It's afternoon. We have a bottle of Cipro that his cousin had given him, which is this grape skin produced kind of table liquor in Greece. He opened up the bottle of Cipro maybe at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, beautiful Kavala Bay, and simply opened up about all of his stories of Greece, of the pain of the war, about what he told me things no one in my family knew until there was not a drop left in the bottle, and it was 10, 11 o'clock. He went to bed, and I went down, and I transcribed in sort of poetic minimalism 10 vignettes of that story, and that's what this poem is. And for me, this poem entitled America is the most important thing I've ever written. And so as long as we're good on time, I'd love to read this poem. Are we good on time, Scott?
We have about 2 minutes left in the live show, so anyone listening now, if this gets cut off in the middle, apologies, but you can always go back into the archive, and whatever is read afterwards will be available. So we can keep going.
Okay, excellent. I should have curtailed my story a little bit. I'm a bit of a talker, Scott.
It's a fantastic story.
So this is called America, and it's dedicated to my papa. 1. What were their names? They had names. The 4 of us came down the mountain, all wind, rock, leaping past Yanni's store, hugging the left bank of the river. They bustled, we found a World War I grenade. It doesn't work anymore. Come over. But Dad yelling down at the mill, me clutching my tight stomach. Dinner time. Tonight, I know we have food, plenty. I've got to go. See you tomorrow. Dinner was late. I could have played with them. Then I heard the explosion. 2. 10 is down to 2. 2 days left. At least I look good. For whom? I can see my haircut in my shoes. I can't yet see her gracious arm, that blinding torch, unreflected yet in black, choppy waters. I know the ocean with the many eyes of the land. On a ship, there is one giant eye. Down to my last cigarette. It's okay. I have $2. 3. I landed with $1, 1 suitcase, 2 shine shoes, 3 words of English, and no one at the port. No one. There is a hole in my leg that wasn't there 2 seconds ago. I'm propped up against the plow I was just pulling, leaning on the leg that works, watching blood in amazement as they dart out from behind the stand of oaks and clap me in chains, still staring mesmerized at the curious red geyser of my thigh, almost the same color as their flag. 5. I recognize each unlucky couple shackled at the ankle. Family name, a sound, sometimes proud, often soft. Kneel, always a hesitation, sometimes a muffled scream. A small pop, shifting of weight, clothing, repeat. Line shortens and shadows grow. 6. Family name, Moratidis. He blinks once, twice. Spell that. I do. Wait. I wait. Are you related to Demetrios Moratidis? I don't know. Wait. I wait. As I wait, I lean forward and count the bodies in the hole, try to erase their names, lose count, damn myself for losing count, then for having counted at all. The kid, younger than me, 13 maybe, who shares my shackles, shifts the weight of me slightly, shoots a look that expects something. 7. Why is my name Moratidis? It could have been Constantinopolis or Samos or Cerametric. Do I recognize this Demetrios Moratidis, commanding officer, communist, maybe cousin? The man I know to be Demetrios eyes me, cold as marble. I can feel my nostrils flare. He whispers a word. I cannot hear this word. They scramble for the key to our ankle lock. The eyes and feet of those not yet in their shared tomb shuffle and twist about, all iron and blood and memory. His skinny arm holds me by the waist, fingers digging into my skin. Each jangle of keys activates some finger to tighten and desperate fingernail to bloody my side. Let them both go. He may be mine, and I can't find their key. Moratidis. As we hobble away, breathless. Pop! Pop! 8. 412 pages. My unlearned Greek hand scribbling pointlessly, my life shouting in an empty room, deafening myself. Each day, every page becomes the cold hand of Greece wrapped around my heart. How long here? 2 months? Alone with my book, scraping the fantasy of a fresh start with dirty fingernails, a farm boy again on new soil, toiling to live, praying for another miracle of hope. 9. They'll burn. The cold hand will unclench. I pray. With each page wilting dramatically with the flame, I lit another and another, slowly watching names of relatives, stories of my father, so many bullets and blood in ink twist rapturously towards a bright sky. 10. With 8 hours and 1 dictionary, I wrote 5 sentences. Thanks you from my heart for sponsoring me and the work. I cannot stay here and need to leave for build life. I have no money, and I need some money. I will always remember this of you. Best wishes to you and your family. And with one $20 bill, a handshake, and half a smile, I was on a bus bound elsewhere, my shirt smelling slightly of 412 burnt pages.
Good Lord. What a piece. To capture
What a night with my papa.
I mean, getting a download from a dream is one thing, but getting a complete heritage download over a night like that is a different level.
I didn't want to keep him awake, so I went down to the bar downstairs to just write in the bar, and I asked and I was asked by the bartender, what are you doing? What are you writing? And I just told him the story of my papu, and he pulled out. He just kept on pouring me drinks while I wrote. Just he smiled at the fact that it was a weirdly beautiful exchange too. But yeah, so I know I've gone a little over time here, Scott, but I really deeply appreciate the questions and the interest and giving me the space on your program to do this. This was a lot of fun, and I look forward to meeting you in person someday and reading more of your work.
Yeah, it could have happened actually a couple months ago. I was supposed to be down in the New Orleans Poetry Festival back in April.
Oh, really? Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I was going to be reading with some friends at a tribute to the late Felino Soriano, but of course the pandemic delayed that. Yeah. But maybe next year, so we'll see. And you're certainly welcome back on the program anytime if you'd like to come back on and talk some more about what you do and read some more of these excellent poems. It's a fantastic conversation. I appreciate it as well.
Awesome, Scott. Well, it was a total pleasure, and I will be following this program and you and your work. And I appreciate you, and stay engaged and stay safe. And until next time.
All right, sounds good. And stay healthy and inspired yourself. Been a pleasure talking with you.
Same, Scott. Have a great night.
You as well. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in this evening. And if you're listening to the end here in the archive, thanks for tuning back in. Go check out ragtimepoetry.com, and you can find out more about Lecco's work that he does there, and perhaps even book an event if you have a wedding or some other occasion that you'd like to have some of your poems written for. Next episode here is going to be next Monday the 15th, 8 p.m. Eastern, with David Francis, a Nigerian writer, works for the publisher Ray of Thought, who I've dealt with over the last couple of years, so it's going to be fun talking with him. Look forward to bringing that show to you, and until then, take care of yourselves. Selah.
Boys in blazers, union labor, the last of the line fought to get on. Leering drivers, beery lifers, and I want to know when we go on. 'Cause we travel darling fanfare, nearly nowhere. Meet the new dolphin who Duluth